My family sold my apartment behind my back, but they had no idea I owned the whole building. They thought they could steal my home, hand it to my golden child brother, and leave me with nothing. But my grandmother saw it coming. She gave me the deeds before she passed. So when they tried to evict me, I let them dig their own grave, and then I showed them who really owned everything. I knew something was wrong the moment my mother showed up at my door, her usual smug expression firmly in place. She didn't even bother with small talk, just stepped inside like she owned the place, her expensive heels clicking against the hardwood floors I had painstakingly restored with my grandmother years ago. Behind her, my brother James followed, arm wrapped around his wife, Lisa, who looked slightly uncomfortable but said nothing. Then my mother dropped the bombshell. "You have 30 days to move out," she announced, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against my kitchen counter. "We sold your apartment to Lisa." She smirked like she expected me to crumble right then and there, maybe even beg for mercy. James, ever the golden child, stood beside her, radiating self-satisfaction. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Lisa needs a proper home now that the baby's coming," James added, his voice thick with entitlement. "You're barely here anyway, always running around with your little catering business. It just makes sense." "Ah yes. The baby?" The latest reason my family had decided James deserved everything while I was expected to just step aside. I glanced at Lisa, whose hand rested on her barely visible baby bump. She looked like she wanted to say something but kept her mouth shut. That was Lisa's role in this family, to stand by James and smile while he got whatever he wanted. I took another sip of coffee, letting the moment stretch. "And you thought selling my apartment was the solution?" I asked finally, my voice as calm as ever. My mother's smirk widened. She pulled out a folder from her bag and placed it on the counter between us. "Well, technically it's not your apartment anymore," she said, voice dripping with condescension. "Your father and I kept our names on the deed when you moved in. For tax purposes, of course." "Of course. We signed the papers yesterday," she continued, practically glowing with satisfaction. "Lisa and James take possession in 30 days. I let out a small chuckle. That wasn't the reaction they were expecting. James frowned. "You think this is funny?" "Oh, not at all," I said, setting my coffee cup down. "I just think we should have a little talk before you get too comfortable with your plans." My mother's smile faltered just for a second. She didn't like how calm I was. "Good. Wait right here," I said, turning toward my office. "I have something to show you." Behind me, I could hear James sigh dramatically and my mother mutter something about me being difficult as always. I ignored them. They had no idea what was coming. As I walked toward my office, my fingers brushed against the smooth wood of the doorframe, and for a moment, I was back in this very kitchen, standing beside my grandmother, the scent of fresh bread filling the air. She had always known this day would come. "They'll try to take it from you," she had warned, her sharp eyes studying me over the rim of her teacup. Even then, frail and wrapped in the blanket I had bought her for Christmas, she was still the most perceptive person I had ever known. "Your mother never forgave me for not giving her this building when she married your father. She thought it was her birthright, not something to be earned." I had laughed at the time, kneading dough for her favorite rosemary rolls, brushing off her concerns as unnecessary paranoia. "She wouldn't go that far, Grandma." "Oh, sweetheart." She had shaken her head, reaching for her bag with slow, careful movements. "You have no idea what people will do when they feel entitled to something that isn't theirs." That's when she handed me the envelope. Thick, heavy, sealed with a small piece of wax. "Keep this safe," she had said. "And don't tell them about it until you have to." I had taken it, confused but trusting her as I always did. When I finally opened it that night, I understood. 2 property deeds. Both signed over to me. The apartment I lived in and the building next door. I had stared at the documents, my grandmother's elegant signature clear as day, and felt the weight of what she had done. She hadn't just protected me. She had ensured that no matter what my family tried, I would never be at their mercy. "You're not like them, Sarah," she had said, watching me closely. "You build things. You invest in people. You work for what you have. That's why I chose you. Not because you're my granddaughter, but because you deserve it." Now, standing in my office, I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk, my fingers finding the edge of that same envelope. My grandmother had seen all of this coming. The betrayal. The deception. The way my mother would try to take what wasn't hers. I took a deep breath, grabbed the folder inside, and walked back to the kitchen. Time to show them just how badly they had miscalculated. I walked back into the kitchen, the folder tucked under my arm. My mother was still smirking, James was scrolling through his phone like he had better things to do, and Lisa, well, Lisa looked nervous, like she had started to suspect something wasn't quite right but wasn't sure if she should say anything. I dropped the folder on the counter with a soft thud. Before we talk about me moving out, you might want to take a look at this. Lisa was the first to react, her voice hesitant. What is that? The real deed, I said simply, flipping open the folder. And the proof of ownership for the building next door. The second the words left my mouth, my mother's smirk vanished. She snatched up the papers like she could will them into saying something different. But there it was in clear, unmistakable legal print. Both properties belong to me. Signed. Notarized. Irrefutable. James leaned over her shoulder, reading the documents so fast his eyes were practically darting across the page. This can't be legal, my mother sputtered, her voice a fraction higher than before. Her confidence was slipping. Good. Oh, it's legal, I assured her, crossing my arms. Mr. Patterson handled everything himself. Grandma made sure of it. The mention of her lawyer made my mother flinch. She knew Mr. Patterson. Knew he had been my grandmother's legal bulldog for decades. Knew that if he was involved, there wasn't a single loophole to exploit. James grabbed the papers, flipping through them like he could somehow find a way to undo reality. His face was turning an interesting shade of red. You knew about this the whole time, he accused, his voice shaking. You let us go through with the sale. I found out about your plans weeks ago, I admitted, shrugging. Grandma always said it's better to let people show their true colors. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence. Lisa had sunk onto one of my bar stools, looking like she might throw up. My mother was still clutching the papers, her hands trembling slightly. James was furious. You should have told us, my mother finally snapped, gripping the counter like it was the only thing holding her up. I tilted my head. Like you told me you were selling my home? I countered, watching her face tighten. The home I've lived in for 10 years? The home where I took care of Grandma when none of you would. Nobody spoke. But I could see it in their eyes, that creeping realization that they had lost. Lisa exhaled shakily, her voice barely above a whisper. What are we supposed to do now? I looked at her, actually looked at her. She wasn't like the rest of them. Not really. She had just gotten swept up in the entitlement and the manipulation, playing along because that's what was expected of her. I let out a slow breath. Well, I said, tapping my fingers against the counter, there's a vacant unit in the building next door. Same layout as this one. Lisa's head snapped up, hope flashing in her eyes. James, however, looked ready to explode. Rent? He spat. From our own family? Would you prefer to find something else in the neighborhood? I asked, arching a brow. I hear the new luxury building down the street has openings. Of course, their 2 bedrooms start at twice what I'm offering. James opened his mouth, then closed it. He knew they couldn't afford that. Not without my parents swooping in to bail them out, which they wouldn't be doing anytime soon. My mother stood abruptly, gathering her papers with shaking hands. This isn't over, she hissed, but there was no real conviction in her voice. I smiled. Oh, I think it is. She stormed toward the door, James right behind her. Lisa lingered for a moment, like she wanted to say something, before finally following them. My mother was the last to leave. She paused in the doorway, staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You've changed. I met her gaze, unwavering. No, I said. I just stopped pretending to be who you wanted me to be. Then I shut the door. I let out a slow breath, running a hand over the kitchen counter, the same one my grandmother and I had restored together. I had one. But more than that, I had protected what mattered. Upstairs in my office, my grandmother's letter sat tucked away in my drawer. Her words echoed in my mind. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being prepared. And sometimes I thought, it's letting people destroy themselves. The storm didn't take long to hit. The next morning, I was halfway through piping buttercream onto a 3-tier wedding cake when my phone buzzed. Dad. Of course. He had been conveniently absent during the whole mess yesterday, letting my mother and James take the lead, but now he was swooping in like the family diplomat, ready to fix things. I debated ignoring the call, but curiosity won out. I put my piping bag down and swiped to answer. Sarah. His voice carried that familiar note of disappointment. No hello. No small talk. Just straight to the guilt trip. Your mother is beside herself. How could you embarrass the family like this? I exhaled slowly, already exhausted by this conversation. Embarrass the family? I repeated, keeping my tone neutral. By owning property? Or by stopping you from illegally selling my home? He sighed, the kind of heavy sigh parents do when they want you to feel like you're being difficult. We were trying to help your brother. Family helps family. You know that. I let out a small laugh, reaching for my coffee. Funny. I don't remember anyone helping me when I was sleeping on a cot in Grandma's room during her last months, or when I was working 80-hour weeks to build my business from scratch. Where was all this family loyalty then? Silence. A beat too long. Finally, he muttered, "Your mother wants to talk to our lawyer about challenging the deed." I actually smiled at that. "She can try," I said, sipping my coffee. "Mr. Patterson has all the documentation. Videos of Grandma signing the papers. Witness statements. Hell, I can send you the medical evaluations confirming she was completely competent at the time." I leaned back against the counter. "But hey, if you want to waste money on legal fees instead of just accepting reality, that's your choice." Another pause. Then a clipped "We'll be in touch." The line went dead. I shook my head, grabbed my piping bag, and got back to work. Later that evening, when the kitchen was clean and the cake was boxed up for delivery, my phone buzzed again. "Lisa." I hesitated, then opened the message. "Lisa, can we talk? Just us." That was unexpected. A few hours later, she was standing in my kitchen, holding a white paper bag. "I brought peace offerings," she said weakly, setting it down. I peeked inside. "Lemon tarts. My favorite." I gestured toward a bar stool. "Those better be from Minetti's." She managed a small smile as she sat down. "And chocolate croissants," she added. "I remember you stress-eating these during wedding season last year." I grabbed one, taking a bite. We sat in silence for a moment, the scent of butter and sugar mixing with the lingering vanilla from my baking earlier. Finally, Lisa spoke. "I didn't know," she said quietly, staring at her hands, "about any of it. James told me your parents were giving us the apartment as a baby gift." "I never thought," she trailed off, looking lost. "You never thought they were stealing it from me," I finished for her. She flinched but nodded. "James said they discussed it with you. That you were fine with moving to a smaller place since your business keeps you so busy anyway." I let out a slow breath. "And you believed him?" She looked away. I should have asked you directly." I studied her for a moment. Lisa had entered our family 4 years ago, wide-eyed and eager to please. She had always tried so hard to fit in, to be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law. And I had watched as my mother and James slowly molded her into what they wanted, pushing her to quit her teaching job because a proper wife doesn't need to work, encouraging her expensive taste because appearances matter in this family. But maybe there was still hope for her. "The apartment next door," I said, surprising myself. "The offer still stands." Lisa's head snapped up, her eyes widening. "Really? 3rd floor. Same layout. The previous tenants just moved out, and I was planning to renovate before listing it." I took another bite of my croissant. "You can rent it at market rate." James would lose his mind over that, but I didn't care. Lisa swallowed. "James won't like that. He thinks family shouldn't have to pay family." "And how's that been working out for him?" I asked, arching a brow. She let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. "Not great. Maybe it's time for something different." Lisa was quiet for a long time, absently rubbing her belly. Then finally she looked up. "Can I see it?" I grabbed my keys. No time like the present. The apartment next door was nearly identical to mine, built in the same era, with the same high ceilings and large windows that flooded the space with golden light. The hardwood floors were scuffed, the kitchen outdated, but the bones were good. Lisa walked in slowly, her fingers trailing over the original crown molding, her eyes scanning the space with something I couldn't quite place. Was it longing? Regret? A quiet realization? "It's beautiful," she breathed, standing in the center of the living room. "Even like this, it's beautiful." I leaned against the doorway, watching her take it all in. "It needs updating," I acknowledged. "But I was planning a full renovation anyway. If you're interested, you could have input on the finishes. Make it your own." She turned to face me, something shifting in her expression. "Why are you being so nice to me? After what we tried to do?" I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Because you're the only one who's apologized," I said simply. "And because I think you might finally be ready to stop letting them make your decisions for you." Lisa exhaled, running a hand over her growing belly. "James is going to hate this," she admitted. He thinks family should take care of each other. James thinks family means he gets whatever he wants. I countered. Tell me, when has that ever worked in your favor? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the window looking out at the city below. I used to love teaching, she said suddenly, her voice quieter now. Before James convinced me I didn't need to work. Before your mother told me that a proper wife focuses on her home and family. I thought I was doing the right thing, being the kind of wife they wanted me to be. I crossed my arms watching her closely. And now? She turned back to me, her jaw tightening with something that looked an awful lot like determination. Now I think I want to make my own choices. For once. That was all I needed to hear. Then the apartment is yours. On one condition. Lisa's brows lifted. What condition? This stays between us. No family manipulation, no running to my mother with every detail. If you and James want to rent it, it's a business arrangement. You'll get a fair price, but I expect everything to be professional. Lisa hesitated for only a second before nodding. I understand. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, I think I'm done playing their games. I studied her for a moment, then held out my hand. Then welcome to your new home. She took it, shaking firmly, and for the first time since I had known Lisa, I saw something different in her eyes. Not fear, not hesitation, but control. For the first time, she was making a choice for herself. The first sign of trouble came 2 nights later when Lisa called me. Her voice hushed but urgent. Sarah, I need to tell you something, she whispered. I could hear the muffled sound of James talking in the background, his voice sharp, agitated. They're planning something. My mother-in-law and your dad. They're talking to a lawyer. I exhaled slowly, unsurprised but still irritated. Let me guess, I said. They're claiming Grandma wasn't competent when she signed over the properties? Lisa hesitated, then sighed. Yeah, James keeps having private calls with your father's lawyer. I heard them talking about using my pregnancy, saying we have a stronger claim because we're starting a family and you don't have kids. That Grandma would have wanted the properties to go to the next generation. I actually laughed at that. Wow, I muttered. They're really reaching now. Lisa sounded torn. I don't know what to do. I told James this isn't right, that you were the one who took care of her, but he won't listen. He thinks if they can drag this out long enough, you'll cave and just give them what they want. They didn't understand me at all. They're about to learn a very expensive lesson, I said, standing up and heading to my office. I pulled open the drawer where I kept everything. The original signed deeds, Grandma's legal statement confirming her mental competency, her recorded video testimony. Let them file whatever they want. I have more than enough to bury their case before it even starts. Lisa hesitated again, then asked, Do you want me to come with you? To the meeting. I paused, surprised. The meeting? Lisa swallowed. Yeah. My mother-in-law just sent a message to the family group chat. They're holding an emergency family meeting this weekend. She said, Your father and I have made some decisions about the future of both properties. Attendance is mandatory. I snorted. They don't own these buildings. They can decide whatever they want. It won't change a thing. I know, Lisa said. But they think it will. I tapped my fingers against my desk, considering. I hadn't planned on entertaining their nonsense, but this was an opportunity. If they wanted a fight, I was happy to end it. Yeah, I said, grabbing Grandma's documents. I'll be there. Lisa's voice was quieter now, but there was something solid behind it. I'm coming too. And just like that, I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. Lisa was done being controlled. And I was done playing nice. Sunday afternoon, I pulled up to my parents' house exactly on time, parking between my father's luxury SUV and James' overpriced sports car. The whole family was already there, waiting, thinking they had the upper hand. I stepped inside to find my mother perched in her favorite armchair, her back straight, lips pursed, while my father stood behind her with that same disapproving expression I had seen my entire life. James paced by the window, arms crossed, tension radiating off him, and Lisa sat to the side, separate from the group, her fingers gripping the armrest of the chair like it was the only thing keeping her there. Various aunts and uncles filled the remaining seats, their expressions a mix of curiosity and expectation. My mother was the first to speak, her voice cool but firm. Sarah, we need to discuss the situation with the properties. There are concerns. I dropped my bag on the dining table and raised a brow. Concerns? Or excuses? My father cleared his throat. We've spoken with our lawyer, and there are legitimate questions about grandmother's state of mind when she signed those documents. Given her age and health at the time, it's possible she was perfectly competent. I interrupted, pulling out a USB drive and holding it up. And I have proof. James scoffed. You can't just wave a flash drive around and think this is over. Oh, it's not just a flash drive, I said, walking over to the TV. It's a video. I plugged it in, turned on the screen, and hit play. The room fell silent as my grandmother's face filled the screen, her eyes sharp and voice strong despite the lines on her face. I'm recording this because I know my daughter, she said, and I saw my mother stiffen in her chair. She never forgave me for not giving her control of these buildings when she married, and I know she will try to take them from Sarah the moment I'm gone. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. Grandma continued, her voice unwavering. This is my decision. Sarah's the only one who took care of me when I needed it, the only one who built something of her own. She is responsible, hardworking, and I trust her to manage these properties better than anyone. The deeds have been signed over legally, and any attempt to challenge this will only expose your own greed. I turned off the video and let the silence hang in the air. My mother looked like she had been slapped. My father clenched his jaw, his hands tight at his sides. James, however, went red. You knew. He spat at Lisa, turning on her. You knew about this, didn't you? Lisa met his glare, but for the first time she didn't shrink away. Yes, she said, voice steady. Because Sarah was the only one who told me the truth. James' jaw twitched. You're my wife. You're supposed to be on my side. Lisa stood up, her back straight. Not when you're wrong. The room fell into chaos. My mother started arguing with my father in hushed, furious tones. My aunts and uncles whispered among themselves. James was staring at Lisa like she was a stranger. I simply folded my arms and watched. Finally, my mother turned to me, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. You think you've won? I tilted my head. Haven't I? Her mouth opened, then closed, as if searching for a response that wouldn't sound as desperate as she looked. Finally, she let out a sharp breath and turned away, gathering her things. Come, Richard, she snapped at my father. We're leaving. Lisa exhaled, shaking slightly as James stormed out without another word. I turned to her and gave a small nod. You okay? She nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, I think I am. As I watched my family crumble under their own greed, I realized something. This wasn't just about the properties anymore. This was about breaking free. And Lisa and I? We were finally done letting them win. 6 months later, I stood in the newly renovated apartment next door, watching Lisa arrange fresh flowers on the kitchen counter. The space had transformed. Warm wooden floors, soft natural light streaming in, and a kitchen that now rivaled mine. The marble countertops had been Lisa's choice, and she had agonized over them for weeks before finally deciding they were worth every penny. Her baby bump was much more noticeable now, stretching the fabric of her sweater as she shifted a vase slightly to the left, then back again. The countertops were definitely the right call, she said, mostly to herself. They better be, considering how many samples you went through, I teased, leaning against the doorframe. She smiled, but it was different now, lighter, more sure of herself. After the family fallout, she had signed the lease, officially separating herself from James' expectations and my mother's control. She had even started her own small business, designing centerpieces for my catering events, rediscovering the love of floral arrangement she had abandoned to fit into their version of a proper wife. James, on the other hand, had finally run out of people to fund his failures. Without my parents' financial safety net and with Lisa choosing to stand on her own, he had been forced to get an actual job, a real one, with responsibilities and a paycheck that wasn't handed to him out of pity. He still wasn't speaking to me, but according to Lisa, he was different now. Less entitled. More aware. It's been an adjustment, she had admitted once, but I think it's good for him. My parents had gone through their own phases, first the silent treatment, then the guilt trips, and finally reluctant acceptance. The turning point had come at Christmas, when my mother showed up at my door looking older, more uncertain. She had sighed, not quite meeting my eyes. I've been thinking about what your grandmother said, she admitted, voice quieter than I had ever heard it. About stewardship. About building something real. She had taken a slow breath. I didn't build anything. I just expected things to be given to me. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was the closest thing I was ever going to get. Now watching Lisa prepare for her upcoming baby shower, the first family event since everything had unraveled, I thought about how much had changed. Your mother RSVP'd, Lisa said, reading my mind. She even asked if she could bring her famous lemon squares. I raised a brow. The same lemon squares she never shared the recipe for? Lisa grinned. She offered to teach me. Baby steps, I said, shaking my head. My phone buzzed, a message from my property manager about a longtime tenant who needed some maintenance work. Under my management, both buildings had flourished. I had even started a small program to help new businesses find commercial space at reasonable rates, watching new dreams take root and grow. Maria, one of my tenants, ran a successful alterations shop downstairs, and Mr. Chin's bookstore was still going strong. This wasn't just property ownership. This was a community. Miss Mitchell, a voice called from the hallway. I turned to see Maria standing there, holding a package wrapped in brown paper. I brought the curtains for the nursery. And some empanadas from my grandmother's recipe. Lisa beamed. You have no idea how much I've been craving empanadas. As they started chatting about the nursery, I slipped away to my own apartment and pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was my grandmother's last letter, the paper worn from how many times I had read it. Property is more than bricks and mortar, she had written. It's about creating spaces where people can grow, where communities can thrive. You understand that in a way your mother never did. A knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. To my surprise, it was James. He looked uncomfortable, hands shoved in his pockets, like he wasn't sure if he should be here. Can we talk? He asked. I studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. We sat at my kitchen counter, the same place where this whole mess had started. James stared into his coffee cup, gathering his thoughts. Lisa's happier than I've ever seen her, he finally said. The apartment, her flower business, even the way she stands up to Mom now. I didn't realize how much we were all suffocating under their expectations. And you? I asked carefully. He sighed. I'm learning, he admitted. Real work, real responsibilities, it's different. Hard. But better. He looked up at me. I'm sorry, Sarah. For everything. For trying to take your home. For not standing up to them sooner. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was the first time James had ever taken responsibility for anything. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again, another message from my property manager, this time about a potential commercial tenant. A small bakery looking to expand. Want to see something? I asked James, grabbing my keys. A few minutes later, we were downstairs, walking through the commercial spaces. I introduced him to Maria at her alterations shop, to Mr. Chin and his rows of carefully stacked books, to the new art gallery that showcased local artists. Each space held a story, a dream being built. This is what it's really about, I told him. Not just owning property. Creating spaces where people can succeed. Where they can be independent. James was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Like Lisa with her flowers, he said. Like you with your catering. Exactly. Later that evening, as I helped Lisa finish decorating for the baby shower, I thought about family, not just the one we're born into, but the one we build around us. Maria had brought more empanadas, Mr. Chin had contributed specialty teas for the party, and even my mother had called to ask if she could come early to help set up. I invited Grandma's old friends, Lisa told me, arranging name cards on the gift table. They keep asking about you, you know. They're proud of how you've handled everything. The next morning I stood in my kitchen, watching the early sunlight hit both buildings. The sidewalks below were already busy with people heading to work or school, the city waking up around me. In just a few hours, this same space would be filled with family, friends, and a new beginning. My phone buzzed again, a message from my mother. Need help setting up? I brought the lemon squares. And the recipe. I smiled, thinking of my grandmother's words about stewardship and growth. Sometimes standing your ground isn't just about keeping what's yours. It's about creating space for everyone to grow into better versions of themselves. Outside, the world carried on, unaware of the battle that had unfolded here, of the lessons learned, of the quiet triumph that now filled this home. I poured myself a cup of coffee, took a deep breath, and let myself feel it, the satisfaction of building something that would last. The buildings still stood tall, just as they had for generations. But now they held new stories. And that was the true inheritance.